you grow up in Chicago, at least I believe, very early on, in a situation where you see that you have so much less than other people, it doesn't take you a long time to realize that if you were born with a particular set of constraints, it'll likely continue to shape your trajectory thereafter, right? Now I know as a scholar that 70% of those who are born poor in a city like Chicago will likely die poor, right? You come to this world at a disadvantage, it likely shapes your trajectory thereafter. And what I've learned is the power of education to intervene on that and hopefully, okay, about the power of education to intervene on that and hopefully change that. That's what it did for me. It took a person who came from this very poor, low income background and it shifted my trajectory in ways I couldn't imagine. And I can't think of a mechanism more probable for improving poor people's life chances than education. So it's been my mission to think about how we can use education to take people who come into this world at a disadvantage for no fault of their own and hopefully help their trajectories be different, right? Like have a different outcome. What happened for me is I ended up getting a scholarship to go to college. When I got to college, I got the opportunity to visit the homelands of my parents, Ghana. And what I learned then is that education wouldn't just help me, but it actually could help any poor black girl anywhere come from a background, that was really poor and end up in a better predicament. So I just wanted to get involved. I wasn't sure exactly how, what, or way, but I just wanted to figure out how could I help more people have a better life trajectory or outcome. But it started off by just doing something basic. I was like, I don't think people think about African girls and think about them as normal, like as people who are just like me and you, striving to aspire to our goals, to attain success, just normal girls dealing with relationships, things like that. So I decided to create a film, and that's the film that you heard them reference. And I just wanted to document girls who are striving to pursue their goals, to get an education. I didn't know what was going to come of it. I just knew that was sort of a thing that I thought was important to document. So I follow these girls on their journeys to going to college, and they get admitted into college, but when I got there, they weren't going. And it basically turned out they didn't have the funding to go, which isn't surprising given their backgrounds. And it would only cost about $500 a year to sort of get them into some of the best schools in Ghana. So I was like, $500? I go to GW. It costs, I think at the time it was one of the most expensive schools in the nation. And so I was a college student. Again, I still come from this poor background. That doesn't change when you go to college, by the way. So what I decided to do was to take the film and screen it across the country, and ended up being multiple countries. And at every screening, we would raise money. And so 90% of our screenings raised money. And that's how we took the first 3 girls who were in the film through college. So we covered their full tuition and everything else. And then we decided to continue to help people. And I created the Tree Foundation, and we helped dozens more. And these girls have been wildly successful. They've come from really remote parts of Ghana, and our girls have been accepted. Multiple girls have been accepted to programs at Harvard. One of our main girls is now the creator and developer of the program. She leads it. Another girl's a principal accountant for the Ghana Education Services. I mean, and now their younger sisters and siblings are going to college. So for all intents and purposes, it's like, this is a success, right? And if you think about during the Obama period, there was Michelle Obama and the Educate the Girl Child campaigns and the Let Girls Learn initiative. We saw the important value from economic research of educating girls. Educated girls are more likely to immunize their children if they become mothers. 50% less likely to contract HIV and AIDS. They contribute to the economic development of their countries, right? So for me, it was like, we're helping these individual girls, and we're possibly helping to develop nations. It's making this huge difference. But there's a lot that my work did not do, and that these campaigns did not do. And that's where this book comes in. My scholarship didn't really keep in mind, neither did these Educate the Girl Child campaigns, keep in mind that the schools that we had girls going to never were created with them in mind to begin with. And so that means a couple of things. To start, in a place like Ghana, South Africa, I could even talk about the US, because we do actually talk about all 3 of those countries in this book. 40% of the schools weren't built with bathrooms. So for girls, once a month, when they're on their menstrual cycle, they didn't go to school. That was up to 6 days out of the month, every single month. My scholarship doesn't change that. What we also saw is that as girls went to school, we started to see a higher level or number of experiences with sexual abuse and sexual violence. These schools had nothing in place for them to report, no trauma or counseling services if they had gone through something, and the power dynamics of the schools hadn't changed. So they still had male teachers who still, exhibited sort of power and authority over these young girls. And my scholarship and Educate the Girl Child campaigns weren't changing that. So it became very clear to me that, like, yes, our girls are a success. Indeed, this policy is a success in terms of these girl child campaigns if you measure it in a very particular way. So one of the main things that my book is trying to do is change the way that we talk about achievement. When you see a book called How Girls Achieve, you immediately think, if you're a mother or an educator, how do I get my kids to get A's? How do I get them into Harvard like the girls that Sally's talking about? And I'm actually not talking about that. I think about achievement as not just about having particular academic outcomes, but as having an experience attaining success that doesn't include sexual abuse, that doesn't have cost, burdens that aren't shared fairly, right? I'm thinking about achievement as like attaining success and having an experience that's safe, that's equitable, and accounting that experience as part of achievement. What that means is, like, if your school is ranked #1 because you got high test scores, but you have high reports of sexual abuse, that's not a success to me. That's not achievement to me, right? And right now, because we measure achievement in these very narrow ways, right? You get a high test score, you get a good grade. There's not a lot of, how do I describe it, incentives for institutions to think about achievement in more holistic ways. So as I know, people see achievement, they immediately think I'm talking about A's. I actually am thinking about creating more holistic ways of that term, of thinking about that term. The second thing that I'm really interested in doing is kind of imagining, what does a school look like that is safe and equitable? And that's what I call like feminist schools. And so feminism often is seen as sort of this dirty word, but really it just means the equality of sexes, right? The equity of sexes. And I imagine a school that can ensure that the burdens of attaining an education are shared fairly. That's it. A school that thinks about quality, not just in terms of academic outcomes, but thinks about quality in terms of equity, right? Gender equity. That keeps in mind that if my experience is different than the next person, then that's unfair, and that matters, right? And so I view feminist schools as sort of centering that and taking that as something that's very important to consider and keep in mind. And I think when you attend a school that's safe, that's equitable, that protects you, when you attend a school that thinks about how to be anti-racist, anti-violent, anti-sexist, then you're actually being incubated to succeed, right? You have the main pillars that you need to be successful. And obviously, I get this question about, well, what happens when you go into the world that is hostile, that is patriarchal? And I think that feminist schools, once you incubate those students and you give them a safe space, you can now give them the tools to engage in a hostile world, right? You now can give them the tools to transgress, to try to shift the world around them. But they have to be at the baseline at a safe and equitable space to begin with. Finally, but definitely not least, and we'll get into it in conversation, I really, really, really want to move away from tropes like nevertheless she persisted, or just do it, or be resilient, or have grit. I mean, name the term. I think those are very dangerous. Our girls are extremely resilient. In fact, you have to be if you're a poor Black girl in America. Name the country, right? Like you have to be in order to survive and succeed. And I think there's a couple of problems with those sort of narratives. And part of it is that it puts a young person in a situation where they're the blame, the individual, rather than the institution. So, for example, there's all this work on confidence. If girls were just more confident, they'd be able to negotiate better salaries. If they were more if they were willing to take more risk like men, then they would sort of get better promotions. That's saying that the individual has a defect that they can then fix by getting more confidence, right? That's actually not keeping in mind that the institutions are sexist and that they should actually just be paying people what they deserve, right? And I am not speaking from a place of, some history that once was. Like, these are articles that are being written in the New York Times, right? Like, those are discussions that are being had right now. And I think it's really important for us to keep in mind the danger of promoting resilience. In fact, all of our girls are extremely resilient, and I really wish they didn't have to be. This work centers on marginalized Black girls, in part because they are at the intersections of multiple oppression. And so, if you can find something that helps this group, that requires it to be anti-sexist, to be anti-racist, to really account for a lot of marginalities that I think should be liberating for a lot of people. And even though I focus on girls, when you're able to center gender, equity and value fluidity, and then you're also making it such that men can act center of, the binary. They can be liberated to sort of exist on a spectrum, right? These things are toxic and constraining for them as well. So I'm centering on this group because I think that it's important to center on those who are most marginalized, because what's freeing for this group should be freeing for everyone else. And with that being said, then I expect that this would actually be helpful for other people, even though this is the group that I focus on. Just to put it in perspective, you come out of the womb, right? You come out the womb, you look to your left or your right, right, as a baby. And whether you are in a poor environment, whether you're a Black person, whether you're a woman, you had no hand in, nothing. But it's going to directly shape your trajectory, like, completely. And again, this is partly personal experience, but sometimes schools intervene and are able to shift that for people in ways that I just can't think of other institutions as being able to do that. So I fully recognize that home lives, and society is going to continue to be, and may continue to be, a hostile place. And I'm just thinking about how schools could be models of equity. Like, people ask me, so what's the dream? And I'm like, I can imagine a world where, how buildings have LEED certification. If it's like energy efficient, or like if it's green or environmental friendly, they have a certification for LEED. I imagine like a feminist certification, right? Like, I know that if my daughter or my child attends this institution, that this school really cares about being a model for equity rather than just a reflection of society. That's actually trying to be a model for something that we would actually like want our young people to live in. And so that's my sort of like pie in the sky, is that hopefully these are spaces that can move past that. And so I do want to recognize with everything that I say that the students' conditions will continue to impact the trajectory, and we're hoping that this is just one thing that makes a small difference in getting them from what would have been, these are the first girls in their families, right, to go to college, but would have been them not going to college, to the particular outcomes that come with a college degree, which in this case, now she's, the principal and counselor for Ghana Education Services. And we want to do that in a way where they're not experiencing trauma, which we see in my first chapter. We want to do that in a way where they're not experiencing violence, right? We want that experience of attaining success to be safe. And I think that's really a central goal of mine in this work.